All right, this is pre-calculus video on 3.1, the greatest integer function. So there's a function, it's called the greatest integer function, and the definition of that function is for any input that's a real number, you take that number and you round down to the closest integer that is less than or equal to the input. And I'll show you some examples in just a minute of how to evaluate that. I want you to be aware of these two different ways of writing the greatest integer. In every textbook or college level course or anything that I've ever seen, we use this top one that's here in yellow. So I believe, based on my experiences, that is the accepted mathematical symbol for a greatest integer. However, for some reason, your textbook uses only the single brackets. So I want to teach you both. I want to teach you what you might see if you ever take a higher level math course. And also, I need to teach you the way your textbook represents it. Because, of course, if I use any materials that come from your textbook, you need to be able to understand what they're getting at, and you will need to be able to look at that and recognize it as the greatest integer function. All right, let me see, is that it for this page? That's it for this page. Moving on. All right, so we're going to evaluate the greatest integer of these four inputs, okay? So, let me see here. Sorry, what I'm doing is I'm going to take this and copy it to the next page. All right, so here again is the definition of greatest integer. So for each number that's an input, you're going to round down to the nearest integer that's less than or equal to x. Okay, so it has to be an integer. Integers are whole numbers. They cannot be fractions or decimals. So that's one of the things you need to know. The output here is always an integer. It cannot be a fraction or a decimal. The next thing you need to know is that it has to be smaller than the input or equal to the input, okay? And it has to be as close as that can be to the input. All right, so I'm trying to move this out of the way now. All right, so my first problem, all right, I'm being given a decimal, so I'm going to have to round that down. It always has to round down. It has to be smaller than or equal to what you're given. All right, so what number is smaller than negative 209.99? This is a negative number, okay? We have to go closer to the negative direction. So the number that is smaller than this, but as close to it as possible and is a whole number, is negative 210. I hope you can read that. Let me try and write that better. 210. There we go. Negative 210. Okay. I've got some more negative numbers. All right. Keeping in mind, we have to go smaller than or equal to. So for problem number 2, I'm being given a integer input. So it's okay for the output to be equal to the input. And so the closest number that is less than or equal to negative 51, that's an integer, is negative 51. Okay. For negative 5/4, right? This is, in a mixed number, it would be equal to negative 1 1/4. So in other words, this is somewhere between negative 1 and negative 2. I need to go smaller than, but as close to as possible. So I'm going to say negative 2. Okay. Square root of 10. All right, let's bring up the calculator. Square root of 10. All right, so that's somewhere between 3 and 4. All right, so which number is the smaller? All right, it's somewhere between 3 and 4. The smaller one would be 3. All right, I think that's it. Yep, that's it for greatest integer function. Just a note, there are no homework problems on this in your textbook. It is mentioned in the textbook in the examples and the explanations for 3.1, but there are no homework problems for this. This is, however, on your quiz and test, so just make sure that you're familiar with greatest integer.